So welcome everybody to today's webinar. It's my pleasure as Vanessa Brady, as the CEO of SBID, to welcome our wonderful three global guests to today's webinar. So we'll start with Car, who's Car here in London, who is from Zaha Hadid Architects, probably the most well-known global architects in the world. As they said on a beer bottle once, something have to do with beer. So, and we have Douglas, who's here from, talking to us from Peru. So we hope that, although it's a little bit dark in your background there, you're shining out, Douglas, so don't worry, we can see you.
Thank you.
All the way from Lima. And we also have Murray, who's speaking to us from the warm and wonderful San Francisco. Thank you, all three of you, for joining us. We have a lot of visitors who have tuned in. And to hear today's talk is about, it's a very easy, relaxed conversation about how the pandemic has changed the way the hospitality sector has been interpreted by us as the designers and us as the movers and shakers of how consumers use space and how they, how we all move and stay in different accommodations and how that's changed over the last few years. So I should say what you all represent, which is Cara's Architects. Mary, your title is a Director of Environmental Teams, global teams for Airbnb. And Douglas, yours is as long as a yard. You have got such a, that's actually, I'm going to ask you to tell us your background and what you do now, because it's really very exciting and very all-consuming.
Yeah, sure. I was, thank you again, everybody, for having us. It's really exciting, been fun to think about everything. I was actually trained as an architect. I worked with Zaha and Car for a while in London. And then I kind of made my way to business school because architecture was too hard, too challenging. And I thought business would be easier, so I did that, but I was wrong. But anyway, so then it kind of moved into the hotel side of things. There's a nice mix of design and business, and then started working for Starwood Hotels, and I was in charge of creating the look and feel, the design, the branding for W Hotels. Did that for a while, and then wanted to do something that was really more about looking at a portfolio of brands. So it really became interesting to start looking at working with Hilton Hotels, because the idea was to take the portfolio of 18 to 20 brands and see how we could grow those different brands for a particular region. So in the last 5 or 6 years, I've been focusing on growing our brands across Latin America, places like Brazil, Peru, Colombia, Costa Rica, and that type of thing. So,
yeah, so you've been around the block.
Yes.
Great, thank you for that. So, Car, do you want to just tell us a little bit about, really we're now coming in some countries towards the end of the pandemic, and some are still bouncing back in and out of it. But the one thing that we have all learned is that over the past year, this pandemic has changed the way we all do business. It's changed the way how we travel, and it may change the way that we interpret our lives in the way that we stay in accommodation in the future. So I don't know, what you think it's achieved in terms of the way that we're going to design hospitality space, because it's such a difficult thing for you as architects to interpret what the future will be when it's changing almost on the hoof every day.
Yeah, I mean, I think the question is, for me, is do we design for the short term or the long term? Short term, I mean, do we assume that everything is going to go back to normal? So we design as we have done before, but with some band-aids, or I think that's an American term for plasters,
Right.
short term, Mary's laughing. So with band-aids such as, okay, we know we have all these, partitions and we have social distancing and all that. but these will come and go as the need as the pandemic waxes or wanes. So essentially, we go back to a brief our view of hotels that it was before, or do we then say that okay, this is going to be with us? It's going to be the new normal, and we redesign our brief. We relook at our hotels with all of these incorporated into the design. So, for example, maybe circulation can be easily segregated or separated so that you don't mix different people. Or if instead of one big gym, maybe you separate the gyms on different floors. Same with, instead of one big conference center, are there like, smaller meeting rooms everywhere in the hotel? I think it's really like an attitude of where we see ourselves going. And I think that's a difficult point, isn't it? Do we yearn to go back to pre-pandemic days and design for that, or say, okay, from now on, it's a different world?
That's really interesting, isn't it? I mean, Mary, you must have seen so much change in the way, because you're big picture, anything built environment is big picture. So for you, you've got to adapt on the hoof for what you want. And also because you're almost, anything to do with Airbnb, you're dealing with both ends of the market. You've got the supplier of your service and
Right.
your consumer. So that's a really double-edged challenge for you. And every country is so different with cultures and things like that. So how do you think the pandemic will change, the built environment in your experience?
I think in our experience, and I think Douglas and I talked about this a little bit, it's this notion of travel and living starting to blur. And that is the way we're living our lives right now, right? We're all working from home. And what we're seeing is in trends where businesses are opening up, employees are asking to be able to have that flexibility with how they work. So a big part of what we're seeing is folks wanting to kind of take their show on the road, if that makes sense, and taking their entire family with them, blending their leisure time with their work time, and staying in locations for longer periods of time, which homes is obviously a really perfect location to do that, as well as hotels. And I think that kind of trend will continue into the future. I think that we've reconnected with families, we've reconnected with friends, and we understand that our time is really valuable. Not having to commute, I think, has been a game changer for a lot of people. And can hotels and other accommodation really begin to think about programming in a way that allows larger groups to travel together, allows you time to work and space to work, but also for your family to enjoy the amenities or the experience of the location that they're in. I think that's going to be an interesting trend to watch and to see how the entire industry adapts to kind of a different headspace for the consumer.
You're absolutely right. I agree with you. I think it's a step change for the way that we all live and work. It depends in all the different generations and investment, really, as to how that will change. I mean, obviously, commercially, Douglas, you're looking ahead for the Hilton Group. That, as I think you said, you've got 20 brands and 6,000 hotels. Is that those 6,000 hotels? Are they just South America or globally?
Oh, globally we have, that's correct. We have 20 brands, always kind of dabbling with the idea of coming up with new ones. So trying to, make sure that we're on top of that. But as in terms of a global footprint, we're a little bit over 6,000 hotels. And the region that I cover, Latin America, we're about 180 to 200 hotels. So much smaller in comparison to the rest of the world. So.
But in that, you've got to fill those rooms. So occupancy is your big thing. And that means always looking ahead as to what's the demand, what do people want, and then fulfilling it. So have you adopted a different policy, or, how's the pandemic with hindsight of the past year, has it made you change the way you are viewing how you're,
Definitely.
And
Yeah. Do you want me to
Yeah, sure.
give a couple slides on that very question?
Go for it.
Okay. Spent some time thinking about that. There we go. So yeah, to answer your question, and this is also to a lot what Cara was talking about. In the very beginning, we all kind of embraced this question of, are we going to do it in the short term? Are we going to address the questions that the pandemic is raising in the short term, in the medium term, or in the long term, or in the super long term? And our initial reaction was, okay, we're just going to put, we're going to do programs with companies like Lysol. We're going to, make everything a contactless surface. We're going to put, lots of cleaning would be optional. All of these very quick fixes. We would put, dividers between tables, and that would all go away in 3 to 6 months, and then we would go back to normal. We've kind of made a conscious decision not to really affect the design of the spaces, because we thought it would be very temporary. So as we kind of started to do that, as we kind of started to, adapt the properties and adapt the assets to be able to allow, business to still happen, we started to realize that there was a deeper change happening. There was more of a fundamental shift in perception and in customers' values and that type of thing. So we really started to think, what is this going to look like in the long term? And a lot of times when we design hotels and we look at brands, and this has always been kind of a value chain that I've always thought interesting in this industry, was that we always start with the brand. I want to say, for example, W Hotels. We spend a lot of time really trying to understand what that brand is, what are the signature elements, what are the look and feel, what are the materials, what are the essences of that brand, and how do we take that brand and then how do we turn that into a design? So, and we build all these signature elements, we build all these genres, we build this whole brand narrative, and then we translate that into one design, say W London. Then the question becomes, if it, as a brand, does it have, how many outlets does it have? Is it like a Starbucks with like 10,000 outlets? Is it like Hilton Garden Inn with maybe 800 outlets? Or is it like W Hotels with maybe 150 outlets? So this idea of taking a brand, understanding how that brand becomes a design, and then how does that execute? But then what became really interesting for us, and we started to, kind of think about how this pandemic was affecting our brands, was what was happening with the consumer. So a lot of times, instead of putting the emphasis, a lot of times we put the emphasis on the brand and then the design, but in kind of starting to look at how our brands might shift, how things might change for the long term, we really wanted to understand what the consumer was doing, how the value system was changing, how the belief system was changing, and also to what Mari was saying, this idea about going back to nature, connecting work and home. How are these fundamental shifts in participants of the earth, of global human beings, how is that really changing, and how can that affect the different brands? So we did a lot of research. We did a lot of trying to understand, what does the new consumer want? Looking at X brand, I won't say which brand that is, but really trying to figure out how can we shift this one brand? How can we, start to understand what the consumer wants? How is that going to start to affect the brand? And how is that brand going to affect the design? And how is that design going to affect the rollout? So we are starting to understand that, yes, today they really they don't want to be at home, but they want to feel like they're at home. So there's this whole idea of bringing home back into it. There's this whole idea of business and work. There's this collapse of work and business, of work and home. How did those two things come together? People really want their hotel to care about them, but also care about the environment. And they really want an element of fun. So in understanding all of those things, we started to create different moments and different signature elements. We started to say, how can we combine work and outdoors? How can we combine work and home? How can we define different types of experiences in the brand that reflected this value system? So how can we pull all of those different ideas together? In fact, we're doing a resort in Costa Rica, and there is a portion of the resort that we're actually going to demolish, and we're going to rebuild it. But noticing that there's been a huge emphasis on getting back to nature, going back to get more experience. There's a big emphasis on ecotourism. So we decided to leave that part of the property in place and let that become an outlet for ecotourism. So this idea of looking at what people are doing and how does that shape the design and shape the brands. And the other thing that is really interesting to all of this. And one thing that's really interesting to me, and I think that we started to understand when we started to look at these consumers and look at these brands, there's kind of been a return to lifestyle. Lifestyle is something that was very strong in the early 2000s with W Hotel and with Andaz and, with the Delano and all of these really, big lifestyle hotels. But then there was kind of a shift away from that because people wanted to focus on the business experience, focus on getting there, getting out, and really not integrating the hotel so much into the locality. But in the recent years, this has really become something that's really coming back into the forefront. So again, how can we bring lifestyle back into the hotel? And by lifestyle, we mean how are things happening in the hotel that are not necessarily the living experience, the sleeping experience. So does the bar become more emphasized? Is there a connection to design, to art, to fashion? And Mari and I also had this conversation too. This is the spectrum of things. I mean, in the low end of the spectrum for the economy brands, you're not going to see a lot of lifestyle. In the upper brands, like the Waldorf and the Ritz and St. Regis, you'll definitely see more lifestyle. But what's interesting is the middle piece. The brands like Sheraton, Marriott, Hilton, DoubleTree, how do those brands incorporate lifestyle and how do they connect to what's happening in the neighborhood so that the experience is being brought more into the hotel experience? And then how does that actually impact the deal cycle and the conversions of hotels, and how do we start to adapt the hotels going forward?
That is such an interesting synopsis of the industry. And for me, it's for so many reasons. One, because it's demographics, because your work is based purely on setting brands and then linking a demographic to that brand and then linking that to the lifestyle. And I get that. And I get the business model attached to that. But actually what you also touched on in there, which is really interesting for me, my business head on, is that you've morphed into the midsection, which was always for me the area where that middle channel of business or whatever it was you were examining, it either shifted up a bit to upper end exclusive luxury, or it went down depending on what was happening in the economy and in government and politics, etc. But in the last sort of 5 years or so, that section has shrunk for the first time. It's been the other two areas that have grown. It's been all so much money, so much glamour, or so much in economy. So, when what you then touched on was ecotourism and lifestyle, and linking into what Mary said, well, that is about family life, that extending the business into family life. And I think that maybe with the technology, we have had less, I'm going to say, snobbery about working from home, because years ago, if you worked from home, it was almost seen to be that you weren't really successful. You didn't have an office. Whereas now, you're really successful if you can work from home because you don't have to go to the office. So there's lots of shifts. I mean, I'll just come back to you, Carl. When you're doing your design, your expenditure for your client is big bucks. People are buying and asking you to design either the interior or the actual structure itself to last. So do you have to take into account the sort of shifts into your designs and your pitch to your client with the two things that both Mary and Douglas have said, or are you only just looking at this now?
I mean, I think, first and foremost, being architects, when we design, we use the elements of our craft, right? The space and the materials and all to make a space that I think for us is spatially memorable and unique. But I think, so a lot of, our projects, maybe I can, segue into the slides now. Hold on. Let me just share screen. So a lot of our projects, I think, are unique in that way, and using, architecture to make the emotional connection with the clientele. I think more so, what we're finding is that there are also other overlying layers as well, such as creating tribes and creating connections. And my question, I guess, it's always at the back of my head as a designer, is architecture, enough to do that? Yeah. Do we need another layer, to really make that resonance and connection? So, for example, this is a hotel we just did in Abu Dhabi, the Opus Hotel,
Beautiful.
where, thank you, brings back some memories, right, Douglas?
Yeah.
Where the different sort of spatial qualities, but also for the interiors, the textures, the materials, all that kind of bring a different kind of experience. We would also like to pride ourselves on the fact that even though a brief usually is X number of keys and restaurant and that kind of thing, that we would like to that each of our hotel appears differently, and that's because we absorb the cultural and even the local context, so that even if it's the same hotel, if it's a hotel for the same chain, we don't repeat and make a cookie cutter. So in that sense, it's a unique kind of experience. Or in this early project by Zaha, of a hotel room in Madrid, where the idea of just this sort of a room that envelopes you, that gives you this feeling of of protection, that corsets you, right? So I think these more and more so, the power of architecture to evoke these emotions, so that it's not just a functional aspect, but it actually evokes this sort of connection to the person, the user, or this, which is the same hotel, but it's all done in black, which gives another different vibe and mood to it. And then finally, which I'll touch on maybe later, there's a project that Zaha did for the New York hotel. Douglas, were you part of this?
Yes, that was.
Okay, maybe we could talk about that.
I was surprised to see that.
Yeah. I was just looking through all the files, and I think this was actually very, very interesting, which was the idea of taking the street, what you find in the street, the shops, the plaza, how people move, and you actually turn it vertically, and it's then encapsulated in this huge edifice. So you see all these different hubs, that happen within this one building. So again, the idea of bringing these sort of different various experiences that you would find on the street, the vibrancy of that, and kind of encapsulating it into a hotel. So yeah, I mean, I think I got a bit off point there, but to answer your question,
Okay.
yeah, I think for me it's always been, how do you design emotion? How do you design the desire? How do you make the connection using the tools of architecture? Or if indeed, you need more than that.
But I think that it always starts with the building and the function. But actually, one of the other important points that has come about over the last few years, and especially even more so since the pandemic, is how to monetize everything and to do that online. Mary, you must have a lot to say about that.
Absolutely. I guess I can share some slides. We'll see how this goes. Are you seeing one slide or a whole mess? Okay. So, exactly that. We are not in the business of the actual amenity or accommodation, but we are in the business of connecting people. And that's really sort of our main focus and our passion. And in terms of scale, we have over 6 million listings worldwide, if that gives you a sense of how many people are hosting on Airbnb and also how many people are staying on Airbnb. And initially, obviously, everything was kind of up for grabs in terms of the initial response to the pandemic. But I think what we immediately saw was that everyone missed travel. And what we saw was a resurgence in the local, people wanting to travel locally within 2 to 3 hours of their home, and really wanting to really explore what was around them in a new way, right? The road trip, the return of the great American road trip in North America is something that we've seen exponentially. You have to now make a reservation to go to a national park because they're so popular right now. And it's a way, again, to connect with your family, with people, but also to explore safely and travel safely anywhere you want to go. And what we're seeing that people are really responding to is this notion of flexibility. And that's something that we can help them with in terms of being that connector. How can we make it easier to host? How can we help you to understand what the consumer is looking for? How can we help you to understand the cleaning protocols or the setup of your home to make it more palatable or more interesting? And how can you leverage what's unique about the location that you're in? Because similar to what Douglas and Carr were saying, people want to experience the local, whether it's a lifestyle hotel or whether it's actually a home. It's this ability to try on a new hat, to try on a new lifestyle. I've always wanted to live in Albuquerque, but I never had that opportunity. Well, now you have that opportunity. You can grab your laptop and your kids and you can go try a new location. And we're seeing a ton of this. And it's very exciting for people. And so some of the searching tools that we've implemented or enhanced this year have really allowed that. Seeing people not choosing a destination, but choosing a type of stay and allowing the technology to help them find a place, which is really interesting because typically in the past, you would put in a location, you would put in a date, and then it would, spit out whether it's a hotel or a short-term rental, a place for you to stay. Well, now you can put in, I want to go for a month and I want to be near the desert. And I have 6 adults and, 4 kids. And it will give you options to find locations that you may not have thought of before. So it's a really interesting twist on kind of the same trends I think that Carr and Douglas are talking about in terms of allowing flexibility, kind of being in the moment of this kind of, we're not quite sure where we are going to end up long-term, but allowing people to choose their own adventure, I think is really, really important. I think it's giving people kind of the psychological safety, the physical safety, but also really helping them to satisfy that desire to get out of the house.
That's fantastic. It's quite interesting. Before you just go on, I just wanted to say that the transient family and that tribe is completely different from the way that business travel has been in the past, because it's, grab and go together. So that community environment must have an impact on the way that we design interiors in the future, because it will no longer be a single room or a family room for one occupant. It's going to be, say, longer term and a different type of family. Sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
No, not in the least. I think absolutely, and I see that trend not just with short-term accommodation. I see that trend in the industry, happening in the industry, across the board, because I think we're fundamentally changing the way that we think about travel. And right now we're seeing a lot of this in North America. We're based in North America, but people are doing this also throughout Europe. Anywhere where travel is allowed right now, people are itching to get out and wanting to, like I said, take their show on the road, because it's an investment in time and energy to travel right now. And so even Douglas is traveling long-term right now. Normally, and I was for many years in the hospitality industry in traditional hotels, it would be nothing. I once went to Bora Bora for a weekend for work. And that's no longer, I don't think, happening. I think people are just absolutely wanting business travel to be more than just that kind of drive-by, and to really embrace the location and to learn from that location, because it will only enhance what you bring to the table in terms of the design.
No, that's
Exactly.
Douglas, you know, with hindsight now of the past year, do you think that it will change the way that you will look at as Hilton, as how the brands will invest and adapt their accommodation?
I think so, yes. I think I guess the paradigm that I always like to think about in this industry, as I mentioned before, was, you know, starting with the brand. How does that become a design and how does that get built? And I think that a lot of the brands will, you know, have some shifts to them. There are going to be value systems that are going to affect the different signature elements, like we mentioned before. But I think what's also interesting about that, and you know, I was talking to you guys before about this class that I teach at Parsons, where we try to come up with new hotel brands. You know, it's kind of like to get the, you know, just some kind of a fun studio that we started a couple of years ago, but it became kind of interesting because, you know, what then, you know, if you think about Cristiano Ronaldo has a brand which is specifically dedicated to, you know, to soccer or to football. And so now that we have gotten all of these types of like different shifts in like value systems and our perception of things, how are those going to create new brands? So I don't know. I mean, Treehouse is an interesting brand. One is an interesting brand, which are very, you know, eco-centric. And, you know, how is this whole connection of work and, you know, and home and outdoors, how is that all going to come together in the formation of new brands? And I think that's really exciting and going to be so interesting to watch. And then taking the brands that we all already have established, the 200 really important brands of the world, and how do those brands, you know, change their systems to make their belief systems to execute more interesting designs. But what I think is also extremely interesting about that paradigm, or those three things, and what is the last year and a half taught us, or how is that going to affect things going forward, is about the owner. I think the owner and the developer are suddenly becoming really interesting, because what's happening, and we just, you know, had a call about this, I guess, at the beginning of the week last week. A lot of the deals that we're seeing come into the pipeline are not new builds anymore. We're not going to see a lot of new construction projects going forward. And I'm sure everybody kind of knows that has kind of gone down and kind of been put on hold for a while. And the hotel cycle, it's 3 to 5 years out. So those guys are always thinking 3 to 5 years ahead. They're not looking at the immediate term. But even having said that, there is still so much of an emphasis on conversions and adaptations. And what's interesting about that is those are more challenging in some ways to design because you don't have a fresh slate, so you have an existing asset. So how do you, I think it's going to be really interesting to see how do the brands get changed? How does the design system get changed? And then how does that affect the deal, affect the conversion, affect the asset, affect the property. And having said that, that's also, I think, more where the lifestyle thing comes in. And what Mari was talking about, that connection to, it's already an established connection to the neighborhood or to the vernacular or to the city. So how does that, you know, become more emphasized, and how is that hotel that's already in existence in a place like Cartagena or San Francisco or anywhere that's already got a connection to the urban fabric? How is that somehow played upon and made stronger and made better? We have, jumping over, we have two brands that I work on a lot here. They're called Tapestry and Curio. And the idea behind those brands is really to integrate into the neighborhood and really to integrate into the street culture. And those are the lifestyle brands. So I think this idea of really trying to understand what's happening in neighborhoods and happening in lifestyle, and how do we somehow blend with that so that we're starting to create, I don't know if we're really going to create hybrid hotels or hybrid brands, but I think it could be really interesting. It might be interesting if some of our hotel projects, our conversions, are not only hotels, but they're blended into other experiences and other lifestyles. I think that could be really pretty interesting to watch.
I agree. I think that you know, this transition that's been forced on every country and every industry is such a, as I said, you know, such a step change. I don't think it will just all bounce back to how it was, because we've all doing things in a very different way. And you know, we tend to in our industry think of hospitality as hotel rooms, restaurants, and maybe bars and things like that. But it's actually a whole lifestyle. And as you touched on, you know, with eco as well, you know, that the way that the group of people that are going to be staying in hotels and moving around the world, they've sort of, it's changed the function that they're traveling for, the reason they're traveling, and the time, the length of time that they're traveling for. Carl, do you think this will have an impact on the cost and quality of the products that architects and designers will start to specify? Because as Douglas said, we all know that the lifetime frame of installation in a hotel is, 5 years, 3 years, 5 years generally. So
Mhm.
do you think that we will look at this on a shorter or long? I mean, are we going to still buy the same quality of materials, do you think?
I mean, to my mind, it seems like, as you said, with perhaps business travel being on the wane, just because, the quick hop for a 2-day meeting and all, now that we know we can do it, on Zoom. So when we do travel, it's a very focused and very specific. And also the fact that we want to maximize the time that we have, the leisure time, right? It's more and more being monetized. It's a consumer, it has value as opposed to before. So I think people probably, when they do travel for, to hotels and stay, it's very specific. They want to have that sort of emotional connection and the story with it. I think also from what Marie and Douglas were saying, perhaps as opposed to, the same hotel chain, doing the same hotel in different countries, you go to a specific country because of that hotel. There's something in there that is unique that can only be found, that you travel to that destination. And within that, it's going to the micro of the design of the hotel. You also want to have a story with the hotel. So that it's not just your conventional business hotel, but you go there because, for example, it's like an eco hotel. This, that these materials are sourced from a particular area. You want that kind of backstory and emotional connection. And I think for us as architects, when we look at the brief, and maybe this is a question to Douglas, right? Perhaps I'm just wondering whether it's going to be more, the brief is going to be more experience-based than a physical base, i.e. X number of keys, has a toilet, 2 fixtures, that kind of thing, has a restaurant, X number of square meters. But perhaps it's more, the first thing in the brief could be, okay, we're trying to design for a community of creatives or community of, XXX, right? Different sort of people. And we start with that as the starting point, and then create the work with that. Yeah.
The problem, it's driven by the star rating, which dictates three pictures, 2 lamps, 1 table, and that sets the budget. And I don't know if you think, Douglas, with what Car's asking you, if we need to reassess the star rating and whether that, and maybe look at things in a different way, because obviously, competitors like Mari you don't have star rating, but you've got more rooms around the world than so many other brands. So
yeah, I think so. I think I think what's interesting about working with designers, and what I really like about it, because I like to teach, and I like that idea of, really pushing things and making people think outside of the box and that type of thing. And I really like bringing designers into the forefront of the process as much as possible. Hilton's a big company. We have very established brands, so there's not a lot of, leeway to change those brands. But, also, working with Starwood, same thing. But a lot of the time I work with, when I was working with W Hotels, the brand was information. So it was really interesting to be able to work with designers on their ideas about what certain elements could be. And, we also do this too at Hilton as the brands start to shift and as new brands come online. So we don't have everything worked out. We don't have every experience figured out. We don't have every interaction, every program figured out. But, if we're working with the designer and they say, oh, it could be really interesting to have this reception desk that is also a bar, that is also, a luggage, maybe this whole thing continues and becomes one thing. And that's an idea that's coming to us from a designer. And then that gets rolled into the brand because we think it's a really good idea. And that's something that we can roll out in the future. So I think there's going to be a lot more opportunity for that. If we start to look at these brands, start to look at these designs, and then start to say, for example, if I'm going to do a tapestry in Lima, and there's some ideas that designers have about how we can adapt that space for new belief systems and new value systems, does that become a fundamental part of the brand, a signature element that we could roll into other projects. So I think I always am a big proponent of that. I think if we could, bring designers into the process as early as possible, it's only going to make things more interesting. But you have time, you have deadlines, you have budgets, you have people that have to approve everything. So it's not always easy to do that. But as these brands are being kind of rethought and reformed and new ones are coming online, I think there's going to be more opportunity for that than there has been in the last couple of years. So I think that'll be really exciting.
Yeah,
and I mean, I see the consumer also just really looking for uniqueness. So whether it's an Airbnb or whether it's a hotel, hyper local experiences or things that they can't have at home. One of our biggest interesting sort of stays is tree houses. So people love apparently to stay in tree houses. But what I'm seeing also outside of Airbnb, hotel brands that are being created that are leveraging Airstream trailers, or the whole notion of glamping. So I feel like the unique stays and these unique experiences are not only associated with short-term rentals. I feel like the hospitality industry is really kind of opening its eyes to different ways that they can connect with the consumer and different ways that people want to travel for different needs in their life, right? What you're doing with your kids may be something different than you're doing with your partner, or for work, but the hospitality brands have the breadth to be able to kind of satisfy where you are for that particular trip. And I think it's just super interesting to me to see how even established brands are beginning to kind of breathe new life and new concepts into the more traditional kind of format. And so you're right, you might still have to have 2 nightstands and whatever, but that could be in a tent. So you can really play with that in a very, very interesting way. And people, I think, are really responding well to it.
And also, we are the creators, we are the inventors as the designers, and it is our duty and responsibility to backwards sort of direct our investors and clients to say that actually what they're asking us for is not perhaps what we should deliver, and try to gently persuade them into looking at different ways. And that means that we have to provide the research and the evidence of research to make them shift that investment into different ways. I think that the last year will have changed the way that we as drivers in the hospitality industry think. I don't know how you all feel, I'm going one by one, how you feel that has the pandemic has changed your role and what you'll keep from it, or what you might take forward in a positive way. Douglas, first off, on the low.
That's a hard one. I think it's I guess I've always thought of myself as being very brand focused. Always really wanting to understand what brands were, and trying to. I was always in that value chain. The most interesting thing to me was always the brand, and I always wanted to shape that as much as possible. But I think in the last year, I've become much more aware of the owner and the developer and the consumer. So I'm a little bit more aware of what's happening on either end as opposed to in the middle, which is what I think I always focused on before. But now I find myself thinking about, I don't know, is this asset going to be are we going to be able to convert this asset? Is this going to make, is the owner going to be able to work with that asset to integrate this new value system? I don't know, somehow my attention has kind of shifted to the edges of the value chain. I think it's kind of interesting. Yeah,
that's really, really interesting. And for me, as a sort of big picture person looking at, all around the world at our designers and things, it's really interesting in your position that you have that shift, because I do think it will change the investment. And when we change the investment into any type of space, as you say, whether it's new build or reconfigured existing space, we have to make it work. We have to make it occupied, because that's the success, of good design. And we have to, provide a solution for the end users, and we have to foresee what that is and jump in ahead of it. So, you know, you Mary, have also got both ends to meet the middle. So you're both in a very similar position to where you are in your day jobs. Yours, Car, is completely different because you have to start at the beginning and then sell the end. Yours is a much more difficult shift.
Yeah, I think because, you know, traditionally, you know, we would interpret the functional aspects, you know, the physical aspects, you know, with the structure, the hotel, the number of keys, how, you know, it functions in that way, and using design as the main thing to do it. I think now being more aware of all these, you know, as Douglas was saying, the brands, most of the value system of the people using it. My challenge would be, how can architecture and design address these other things, you know, which are not necessarily a physical requirement, but could be an existential sort of, you know, aspiration, or existential sort of a part of the brief. How, you know, design can be used to create communities and create connection, which are more ephemeral than, let's say, you know, the four walls of a room, which is very interesting as well, I think, you know. Yeah.
That's also, I think, one of the things we haven't touched on is, you know, the as you say, the function, but we haven't probably post-pandemic sort of thought about the individual and what they're coming to us for, whether it's going to be driven in the future by price or necessity. But what we did sort of, I think we're all in agreement that the technology that has come out of the pandemic has totally changed people's perception of how they want to live their life and the speed in which they want to live it. Because I personally find that people deliver on time, but they do it in a much more measured way, and it seems to be less frantic. You know, we're all answering 50 emails in an hour, and I think that's semi-slowed down, and it seems to be a little bit more friendly. People are more kinder and friendly. Whether that continues, I don't know, but how people will move around the world on business, if we're going to have the same necessity and the same amount of flights and, you know, stays, then we're all okay. But if that reduces because of technology, we might see a shrinkage in the amount of jobs that you get instructed for as architects to reconfigure space, or your clients, Mary, or your brands, Douglas. This is a really big consideration that I think hospitality has to look at.
That was one of the things that I thought was really interesting about what Airbnb was doing, because they were really able to, you know, look at, I mean, obviously Mari can speak to this better than me, but they're really able to take advantage of that technological component more so than we were, because we have built assets and we have a lot of, like, we have rent and operations and capex and all that, but we're not very nimble in that space. We want to add it on as a layer, but I thought that, you know, these 100 upgrades that you could choose, or these, or maybe these 100 different preferences that you could choose, could like start to identify or start to decide, you know, what your stay looked like. I thought that was really becoming interesting, because that was, like you're saying, really bringing the technological component in and creating a unique stay based on that, which is something that we really could not do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's really about meeting the consumer where they are and providing flexibility for them, and also inspiration. I think, you know, hotels, I think in the past were always kind of design inspiration almost for residential projects. You know, when the glass bathroom was invented, everyone wanted to then bring that back to their home. And so, you know, I think the app, as it were, has really provided a lot of interest and inspiration for people when they couldn't travel, right? People are still on the app. They're still flagging and favoriting the places that they want to go in the future. And that's not just for us, that's for hotels as well. I mean, people are creating Pinterest boards of where they want to travel in the future, which I think is so interesting. I also think that there's been a huge impact on residential design. You know, in the past, I would say, we were going to very open plan, open concepts in homes. And the minute we were locked down, those with kids realized that they had no place to have a quiet thought.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's been really interesting. And I don't know globally, but certainly in the US, the amount of home renovation that's happening right now, as people are spending more time in their homes and really seeing that they want to invest in their homes. But the interesting thing is that they also want to monetize that. So potentially putting their own home on a platform allows them to travel. So it's also this kind of interesting economic proposition of being able to live anywhere because you can optimize your own home for others to be in it when you're not there. So, you know, there's just like very interesting trends that are happening right now. And this notion of being a nomad, it no longer feels like a negative. I think being a nomad feels very kind of inspirational and exciting. And I'm hearing so many people that are saying, you know, now that I've been vaccinated, I want to go to Costa Rica for a month or 6 months and work from there. And that means that they're putting their place on a sharing platform. So, you know, that's an opportunity for designers.
Yeah.
Well-designed spaces rent best and fastest. So, you know, the design community on this webinar, you know, think about it. It's an interesting proposition in terms of there's different ways to design hospitality.
I think also sort of a corollary to what you guys have been saying, also Vanessa touched on, in retail, there's this new the whole movement about slow retail, you know, slow fashion and all. Is there something, do you guys see something like that emerging in architecture, slow architecture? Sort of, I guess it's sort of like the experience of, you know, renting somebody's place, you know, an Airbnb where you really immerse yourself in the experience. So as designers, when we have a brief, is there a component, you know, do we design something? How do we design something for that idea that it's not about, you know, the immediacy, you know, it's for a long term, it's slow architecture, I call it.
Such a great question, Car.
Douglas,
And I think it's both. I think it's slow and fast, right? People want the immediate, they want the ease. They want to be able to check in simply, book simply, pay simply. They want all the kind of amenities in that. But to your point, they also want to be able to sort of go hyper local. They want to be able to truly embed themselves, find that little coffee shop that's, you know, hidden, the hidden gems, I think feel really meaningful to people and are satisfying this sort of need for, you know, this kind of curiosity and experience, because we all have been a little bit trapped. And so I think it's this opportunity to explore, and you're exploring maybe in a different way than these kind of like the mega trip. Maybe we're on pause for the mega trip where, you know, you see a city a day. You know?
So it's also really interesting that I think out of this conversation, we've just worked out that people no longer want to or need to live in their home forever, but they don't have to give their home up. Whereas years ago you did. You just disappeared. So are people, do you think they will up their children because they can travel and work from their computer? Maybe there'll be transitions. I don't know how you feel because you teach at Parsons and we're connected with Parsons. So all the students can come and join us at SBID because we have this relationship with Parsons. So which we love Parsons. So the New York school. When your students, Douglas, they come from all over the world, I presume. And we have the same now, or every country has international students. Does that mean that they will have this blended learning with online and in situ in place, do you think? Because that's the thing that anchors us. It's the job, it's the children. But if we can lift the job through the computer, do we also lift our children and just be free? Because if we can have that flexibility, it will also change I'm sure it will change the money that we spend in our homes, because, you know, it's got to be durable and long-lasting and easily repairable. But we're not spending money on a holiday where it's actually work, live, eat, travel. It'll be very different.
I think one of the more interesting things that's coming out of the whole thing is the hybrid, and you know, how are things hybriding and how is work and live coming to. We've been talking about that, and I guess that's kind of why I think the conversion is interesting, because I think it kind of keys into a little bit about what Mari is doing and also what Cara is doing. I mean, I think the experience is we're not going to plunk a diamond built beautiful, you know, asset in the middle of a city, and then that's going to suddenly become the thing which everybody goes to. That I don't think that's going to happen for a while.
Yeah.
But we're taking assets that, I keep going back to the conversion, but we're taking assets that are already existing, so they're already plugged into an experience system. And I think what's going to be interesting about that is to see how that shapes a brand and how that hybrid. I don't know if hybrid hotels are going to evolve or if that's going to happen, but I think that could be really interesting, because we have hotel projects where a lot of the owners are thinking, okay, well, I've got this 300 hotel room in development, and that's supposed to open in 2 years, but suddenly there's no market demand for all those hotel rooms. So, you know, are we going to change those hotel rooms into something else? And going forward, do we create these buildings or these experience centers that are hybrids between, you know, hotels and other things? And then, you know, how does that connect? I guess, how does that connect to urban situations, and how does that connect to the family, to the workspace, to the build space? How do those hybrid things start to evolve? And it's not so much to say that I'm not that interested in brands, because definitely I am, and definitely I think that's definitely the most important thing about what I do. But I think what's coming to the forefront is the conversion, or is like, how do we adapt into the existing, and how do we take the experiences which are already existing in a place and weave those into the thing that we're creating, more so than we've ever done before. And that's going to happen through technology and through, you know, pop-up events and, you know, things that people are, you know, grounding themselves in maybe a built stay, but they're also integrating themselves into other experiences. So I think that's going to definitely be something interesting.
I mean, oh, sorry. Yeah, I was just going to ask Douglas, you know, as sort of a client in a way, when you have your designers, would you then use that as the starting point for your brief from now on? It's like, you know, we want to create this hybrid, this experience. We start with that instead of a functional requirement.
Well, I mean, maybe that's, you know, maybe that's a partnership project with Mari. Maybe there's a way to, you know, maybe there is a way to blend those two. I think that I mean, I don't know. I'm not sure how much that would happen for us for now, but I think that if that could be a point of departure for the brief, or thinking about the hotel experience, you know, not just only thinking about the area program that you're given to design a hotel, but definitely thinking about all the, you know, amenities and all the different, you know, locations and events and things that are happening around that. I think that could definitely be the beginning of a brief for the formation of a new brand, for sure. But how does that, you know, sleeve into the existing brands? That's, you know, that remains to be seen. Hopefully, much more with lifestyle.
We'll all be stakeholders in it, Douglas.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've been chatting for almost an hour, so we'll draw to an end, and it's been so interesting. I mean, we do lots of webinars, but I really love doing being involved in today's, because you're also highly high achievers in your own various fields. So it's really interesting. I just want to say then to Mari, you've got 6 million properties, but you don't own any. I mean, that just demonstrates technology, how powerful the technology is. And I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add before we close.
No, I just wanted to thank you for fostering this really interesting conversation. And I love the different perspectives of the traditional hotel brands, the architect, and we're all sort of pointing at the same thing. We're kind of approaching them in different ways, but ultimately it's about providing really unique and interesting experiences for the consumer. And I think there's room for everyone. And I think that, again, different strokes for different folks, but also different experiences depending on what your travel needs are for that particular trip. And I think that's what makes hospitality just so interesting and exciting to be a part of, because there's always room for the new. There's always room for interesting design, and designers have so much impact on the overall experience of hospitality. It's fascinating. It's just a fascinating place to be.
It is. I agree. So I think that, what we've pulled together from today's chat in synopsis is flexibility, function, not necessarily a need for ownership, transient families, tribes, conversation, lifestyle changes, and brand awareness. Anything you'd like to add, Douglas?
No, I think that sums it up. And I think that, yeah, again, thank you guys so much for this. This has really been so interesting, and it was great to, prep for it and think about it, and, think about, all the different, I think for me, I would just take it back to the thing that I think is really interesting is, the brand, the design, and the pipeline, and how are those things going to change in the future? And I think they are going to change. And I think that we're starting to definitely see them change. And how does, experience come with design, come with the asset, come with the consumer, and how do all of those things start to play together? And what I'm really excited and interested to see is what new brands are going to come online, and are those brands going to be hybrids of, the built world with the experience world, or are they going to be something else, or are they going to be the outdoors, indoors? So for me, that's I don't know, that's what I'm pretty excited to see. So
great.
Yeah.
And Carl, your world will be very different, because you've got to be hot on the hoof if you have to adapt architecture from whatever comes out of whatever the other guys do. You've got to quickly be nimble too.
But that's really exciting, I mean, how we can adapt these sort of hybrid programs and find a physical form to express them, to manifest them. I think that would be the challenge with design, right? It's not just the traditional boxes and all, but, if you conflate, a hotel with, let's say, co-living, for example, right? You push them together. How does that affect the design, the spatial aspect of it, even the interiors? That sounds very exciting to me.
Great. Yeah. Well, Carl, thank you so much from your home in London and
in quarantine.
Yes. And Mary, you from San Francisco. What time is it there?
It's 9 a.m.
Okay, now, so you had a really early start. So thank you for getting up and getting ready for us.
My pleasure.
And Douglas, you in the dark there. What time is it in Lima in Peru?
It's 11:02 a.m. So very early. Yeah.
Okay. So the sun's rising.
Yeah, exactly.
Great. Well, thank you so much, all three of you, for joining us at SBID for today's webinar. It's been really fantastic. I've loved chatting to you, and I hope we're going to do a follow-up. Let's see, watch this space in X months or weeks time. Let's see.
That would be great. Yeah.
Sounds great.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.